Welcome to the Frontline Herbalism podcast with your host Nicole Rose from the Solidarity Apothecary. This is your place for all things plants and liberation. Let's get started. Hello, welcome back to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. This is the first interview in the series all about the kind of politics of trauma and exploring trauma like in more depth. I'm really happy to introduce you to Rob. So he's actually my partner. Maybe you've seen us, seen our like little cute selfies on Instagram and stuff. We met like several years ago, actually, when he had been out of rehab for a year or so. And at that stage in his recovery, he just wasn't kind of ready for a relationship, so I kind of was a bit heartbroken. And then, skip forward, he, got back in touch with me this year and we've reconnected and I'm very much in love. He's a really amazing human who's been to hell and back, but is, incredibly caring and like loving and compassionate and, has used all of his experiences to kind of support other people. So I hope you learn a lot from the interview. We talk just kind of like a content warning, I guess, like we do talk about things like people dying and overdoses and kind of medical neglect and, people being dehumanized and stuff like through their experiences of addiction. We answer kind of questions around like common myths about things like enabling people. We talk about the impact on families. He gives advice about kind of recovery and programs he's been involved in and that have helped him. And I just kind of think like wherever you are, like on that spectrum, whether you're someone who's been really traumatized yourself by, having a parent who is in active addiction, for example, or whether you're someone who's been through that yourself, like I do think you will find it really interesting and hopefully moving. Obviously, like we just scratched the surface on a bunch of things, but I think I think he's done an amazing job and I hope you enjoy. And just a shameless plug, my Herbalism, PTSD and traumatic stress course is available very soon. It's coming out on Friday, so please join the waiting list if you want a 10% discount. Otherwise, you will hear me talk about it a lot over the next couple of weeks before I kind of close enrollment again. So just wanted to plug that. Like we explore a lot of things about how trauma and these different life experiences shape our body, shape our health, and the role that plant medicines can play in supporting us. So I hope this episode brings you something. Would really love to hear your feedback. Feel free to DM me on Instagram or email me. Like I know Rob would love to hear what people think. It's obviously like very scary, like talking about this stuff publicly and things. So anything you'd like to share about its impact would be amazing. Okay, take care. Hello, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Please can you introduce yourself, your pronouns and anything else you'd like to share?
Hello. Thanks for having me on. My name is Rob and my pronouns are he and him.
Amazing. Thanks for coming. And thanks so much for offering to share more about your story and about like trauma and addiction in general. I'm sure like loads of people listening will have been affected by addiction in different ways. So if you'd like to just start by introducing a bit more about yourself and your experience with addiction, that would be amazing.
I guess the actual nature of my drug use is a similar story to, those that will be listening or, family members of those that are listening. And it is essentially the progression of, I picked up drugs when I was quite young. Specific ages aren't really important, I believe. And, started off with smoking a bit of cannabis and, party drugs and stuff. And that quickly progressed into full-blown active addiction with harder drugs. I don't really believe with the nature of addiction that the specific drugs are important when we're trying to get a message of kind of, trauma and addiction out there. But mine were, by the end, the last 6 years or so of my use, and my drugs of choice were heroin and crack cocaine. But as I say, it didn't start off that way. It was a progression over a course of a few years. And it stole my the majority of my life away from me. I started as a child and I have now been out of rehab and clean for about 6 years. But that didn't happen until I was in my late 20s, so I lost kind of almost 2 decades of my life to active addiction. And, not only did it kind of affect and ruin my life, but, as we'll kind of talk through in regards to trauma, those that are closest to me, or were closest to me, were affected also. Um, they were traumatized just as much as I am, I think.
So this like podcast series is all about trauma, and it's largely what my work with the Solidarity Apothecary focuses on, especially with my upcoming herbalism, PTSD, and traumatic stress course, which like really dives into how trauma affects the body and like the politics of trauma and all of that stuff. And I'm just curious to know, like, how do you think addiction relates to trauma? Like, how is it traumatizing in itself? Like, are people in active addiction more likely to be traumatized in different ways? And yeah, like, does addiction stem from trauma, for example? Sorry, I know that's like a million and one
Mm.
questions, but yeah, I'm just curious, like, what your views are.
I mean, I think for me personally, and and having been in the recovery circles now for a while as well, and listening to other people's stories, I think there's kind of two main sides to it. And um, I think the actual using of the drugs itself, especially when you get into the harder drugs, I think um, just the process of that can be traumatizing enough. Like every single day. Um, for me anyway, I was kind of rolling the dice, and you know, uh, I was well aware that kind of that day or that use up or that time, that one time I, um, stick a needle in my arm could have like very well could have been the last time, because, the drugs I was taking and the ways that I was taking them is, it's dangerous. So I think ultimately that realization when you're that far into active addiction and you're fully aware of the harm you're doing to yourself, and well, and to others also. I think that's kind of, because no one says, when they get to that point of, on a daily basis, having to use, heroin and crack cocaine, those really dangerous drugs. No one ever sits there and says, oh, I wasn't aware of, you know, how dangerous it is. I wasn't aware that that could kill me. So it's always running through your mind, no matter how much you use. Um, so just that process, every single day, you know, I'd find myself having to, like break multiple laws just to, um, just to actually be able to get myself that next fix and score, what became medicine to me. So all day, I'm kind of aware of my actions and what the consequences can be. Which, yeah, in itself, that's traumatizing. I'd go to bed anxious, I'd wake up, anxious, and I'd spend my days full of anxiety. Apart from, those small kind of, sections of the day where I'm high enough to try and block it all out. And that's just the using and, the scoring of drugs itself. Even just kind of finding money to be able to afford them, that doesn't go without trauma. I've kind of put myself in situations, working for or helping out people that, aren't the nicest of people, that, doing things that are, again, quite dangerous, and I've put myself in situations that, could have cost me a lot more than just a few years, lost to active addiction. So that kind of using and scoring of the drugs itself is kind of, one side of the trauma. And I think, at least when you're actively in addiction, at least you kind of have a bit of temporary relief, from when you're using, um, throughout the day, which when you come into recovery, and, you put the drugs down, the feelings and the realization of kind of how you've lived your life and all that kind of, that really hits. And I think that in itself can be really traumatizing. Like you finally stare, like your PTSD in the face. You kind of stare the people that you've hurt most in the eye and have to deal with all that kind of stuff. And and you kind of, obviously, when you clean up and stuff, you start working on yourself, and you have to deal with all the stuff that you push down. And it's kind of, um yeah, I mean, it's not easy. It's not easy at all. So yeah, I mean, as far as people in active addiction being traumatized, I think it goes without saying. Yeah, as I say, whether and the thing is with trauma and pain and all of that kind of stuff, like obviously it's completely subjective, right? Pain is relative to the individual that's feeling it and stuff. So what might have been a real easy day at the office for me whilst using might have been like an extremely traumatizing experience for someone else. And so I just don't think you can go into that life and kind of be, like gripped by that disease without, walking away if you're lucky enough to at the end of it, without being traumatized, quite frankly. And we all kind of, we're all aware that addiction's a family disease as well. So like obviously, again, if you're lucky enough to walk away from it with your life, then it's not just you that ends up being traumatized. Like without a doubt, those closest to you will be as well. As far as addiction stemming from trauma, I don't know. I think addiction itself to me is kind of something that I believe is a disease, like a complete health issue, above anything else. That I think whether it's unleashed or not in a certain individual, um, I believe you're kind of born with it. So I don't think it stems from trauma, but I do believe, obviously, those that are, traumatized prior to picking up any kind of form of substance can obviously use that trauma as a reason to use the drugs in the first place. And then, I believe that once you do, if you have the same disease that I do, then um, yeah, you kind of won't be able to put the drugs down, right? So then you're kind of in that grip of obsession and compulsion of active addiction. So yeah, I believe, I think people do pick up the drugs from trauma. I just don't think that is the cause of the nature of addiction itself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's like a massive field, right? And yeah, thank you so much for sharing about some of your experiences. I wanted to ask you, like, yeah, how do you think people in active addiction are treated in society in your experience?
I mean, not great in it. I think it's society as a whole. I think yeah, it's still viewed as, we're viewed as kind of criminals, right? So um, if you're a hard worker that kind of finishes at 3 and goes straight down the pub and drinks, a skin full of alcohol, and then drives home and gets, goes to bed and gets up for work and does the same thing the next morning, that's completely fine, right? But the minute you kind of use drugs that I did and stuff like this, or anything illegal, I think we're deemed as criminals. And in no way is it kind of viewed as a health, a health problem, like an illness, or it's just, yeah, it's a judicial problem. That's not the right word, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. um yeah, rather than a health issue, and I think yeah, I think in my experience, especially when it comes to um professional people in this society, like GPs, or yeah, I mean, even when I was trying to study, once I'd got clean, I was still kind of treated really strangely by tutors at college and stuff like this, because I talk very openly about my experiences, and yeah, I just don't think anyone can accept the fact that um, like we are, as addicts, I believe we're kind of um, all sick people really wanting to and trying to get well, rather than bad people trying to get good, trying to be good. That that kind of along the way may cause some problems, like may uh, well, break the law, but it's not kind of what people don't seem to realize. And what I kind of try and drill into people's heads is that, like, not one person that I know, including myself, would go through the things that I've been through, do the things that I've done, whether that's like stealing from my closest family members, or like putting myself in situations where, like I'm having a gun pointed to my head, whatever it is, like they're not things that I'd ever choose to do. So you've got to be really sick and have no other choice in your own mind than to do those kind of things. But yeah, we're not viewed as sick people. We're viewed as bad people, and that's kind of the narrative that I've had all through my active addiction, and even since being clean. Also, yeah, and I believe that kind of most people that I speak to kind of feel the same about it.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I know we've talked about like our shared life experiences of feeling kind of dehumanized, like, like through the prison system, for myself, and like through active addiction for you. Like, I just wonder like what that means to you, to be treated like less than human.
I mean, now as I sit here, kind of a few years down the line, since getting clean, um, it almost doesn't mean much to me anymore, but it was something that I dwelled on for a long time, and actually one probably kept me in active addiction longer than I wanted to be. Um, and since getting clean has probably, for quite a while, probably kept me from being uh, the kind of version of myself that I am now, because you throw enough mud at a wall and it sticks, right? And kind of, I mean, even to this day, if you ask those closest to me, I probably am quite quick to slip back into a negative kind of narrative towards myself, like I can, um, I'm quick to see myself as a piece of shit in a way, and I don't know if that will ever completely leave me, but that's kind of, through years and years of being dehumanized, I think. And yeah, I kind of, those that I've spoken to in and out of active addiction still kind of feel the same. But yeah, I mean, kind of day to day now, like, as time passes, I feel kind of like I can accept myself for what I am now, and actually, doing things like this, alone, like kind of with the views of helping people, helps kind of bring you back out of that mindset anyway. But yeah, it's not nice. It's not nice.
And what has your experience been like in terms of kind of like accessing healthcare, like from the NHS, for example? Like, how do they commonly treat people who use drugs?
Yeah, I mean, from the minute I uh, went to my GP years and years ago, I was probably 16 or 17. The first time I went to my GP and said, I'm in trouble, I need help. From that moment on, I have been treated differently, not by everyone, but by the vast majority. I have been treated differently, spoken to differently, looked down on, even to the point where I have had to fight to get the same kind of treatment that someone that isn't an addict would have got, even to the point where I've been clean quite a while now, and multiple years, not a few months. And I went to the GP very recently with ongoing health issues, and even now I was with my partner. She asked my partner to leave the room and looked me in the eye and said, I've got to ask though, are you using? Because, that will kind of, in not so many words, dictate what help I give you. I said no. She pushed and pushed and pushed, and obviously suggesting that she didn't believe me. And yeah, she told me that she didn't want to refer me for the treatment that I needed for the ongoing health issues. She outright told me she didn't want to do that because she believed that I was using substances still. Um, and yeah, I mean, eventually I did get the help and I did get the treatment I needed, but it was more of a fight than it needed to be. And if I didn't have that fire inside me now, I wouldn't have got it, like, and a lot of people don't have that drive and that fight, especially when they're newer into recovery. So, they would have just accepted that and walked away, not getting the help that they needed.
And yeah, like how does active addiction like affect relationships and families and communities, would you say?
So this is like a real personal one, right? So, I mean, it's easy to speak for myself. Like my active addiction has completely torn apart my closest relationships, with family. Yeah, I mean, it got to the point where I mean, my siblings wouldn't speak to me. They still barely do. I've got no relationship with them. And, actually, I view myself as one of the lucky ones because I still have two parents that, our relationships aren't the best, but actually, once having cut me off and once, they saw that I was kind of doing what I needed to do and putting the work in myself rather than relying on other people or, kind of ignoring what was going on for me once they saw that. And it took a while to prove that it wasn't just, another time of me going, oh, I'm going to stop this time or it'll be different, and all that kind of stuff. But after a while, I'm lucky that they have kind of stayed, um, they've stayed with me. They've allowed me to, be part of their lives still. So yeah, and I know not everyone's that lucky, Um, I kind of, I think, like romantic relationships is another one. I mean, it's very rare that I see couples where one is either still in or has been in active addiction and one's, not an addict. And, it's very rare that that kind of dynamic works, right? And on the flip side of that, if you have two active addicts, it's a really dangerous kind of recipe, like it's kind of known that they'll keep each other, in that cycle of addiction. If one wants to get clean, being around the other one, it just doesn't work. You'll get drawn back in and vice versa. So it's really hard to maintain even friendships, like especially when you're actively using, you're always kind of worried that, it's just what you've got that people want. And when the drugs, run out and dry up, then, you realize that no one's around anymore and all this kind of stuff. So just, yeah, maintaining any relationship, in or out of active addiction when you have this disease is really difficult. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm 34 years old and, um, for the first time in my life, I found a healthy relationship. But that didn't happen when I was using, and for a long time after as well. Um, so and if it does, if you're one of those rare kind of couples that stay together, or if you're one of the rare people that manage to find love in active addiction, like that um, it's going to end in pain for one or both of you at some point anyway, so yeah, it's not easy. um yeah, I mean, as far as how addiction affects communities, I mean, yeah, there's so many ways, right? I mean, from the basis of you know having to, addicts having to fund habits, and as far as addicts kind of having to commit crime to fund habits and stuff, like whether that's kind of, shoplifting, burglaries, whatever it is, like there's always going to be crime until this stuff is made legal, and we have other options than to go out and commit crime to fund habits until we're ready to get clean. So there's that factor on the community, I guess. In and that's like the larger community, right? And in smaller ones, that such as groups of recovering addicts, or like groups of, because I used to be able to walk around my city and I'd know everyone, all the users, and in that community, you know within that, you are kind of losing people every day. Yeah, so I mean, as far as addiction on the community and how it's affected, yeah, I mean, there's the obvious, like addicts have to fund their habits, right? I know I did, and um, yeah, I mean, being an addict in, being an active addict anyway, itself is like a full-time job, right? Like, and actually we probably work just as hard, if not harder than a lot of people do on their 9 to 5, to fund our habits. And yeah, I mean, a large proportion of that, especially when you kind of you're talking about using, the kind of drugs that I spoke about previously, a lot of that is committing crime, and and that crime does affect the community, and unfortunately, there's victims every single day of kind of addicts, trying to support their habit, and like I've said before, it's not something we want to do, but until drugs are made legal, and so we don't have to commit crimes, until it's made legal, and is it, a price that we can afford to use when most of us, are on or were on um, benefits, because again, it's a health issue, not something we want to do, sitting on benefits, until that's the case, we have to go out and commit crime. And the larger community is affected, we don't want to be burgling people's houses or, robbing shops every single day to sell the gear on to, make a few quid. That's not what we want to do. But unfortunately, yeah, that's kind of, the larger community is affected in that way. And um, yeah, I mean, I guess it's from a personal point of view, kind of my community that I was in, in active addiction, and even more so actually since I started getting clean and using the fellowships to, the 12-step program to help me do that and to help me continue to do that. Um, in that personal community for me, it's the losing people that I think is the hardest, and that in I think that's what hits hardest for all of us in these spaces. It's when you get a really close community of people helping each other to get clean and stay clean and supporting each other, and building bonds that most people wouldn't be able to understand. And then people, because of this disease, and people start dropping, on a daily basis, we start losing people, and that's difficult, emotionally, that's really, really difficult. And it's, to the point where kind of, I was saying to my partner the other day, like I was sat in a meeting not long ago, and I looked around, and surrounded by friends, and I realized that, literally all of my friends now, like, are either, you know, murderers or dead, because, we've all been through, done stuff, and we're the lucky ones that have made it either out of prison, out of institutions, and not died. Um, and then the rest do, and that's a problem, right? Because people aren't getting offered the help before we need it, and before we kind of get to that stage, and the community will continue to be affected until we do. So, yeah, I just don't think that will ever change until the help's put out there. But yeah.
And like, what support do you think people in active addiction need?
I think that's, I mean, the key word is just support. I think people in active addiction don't won't ever accept anything like, I don't know how to put this. Um, I think it might sound counterintuitive, but we need to support people in active addiction to be able to use, um, and just to support them to do it in the safest way possible, right? So, like, this country's so far behind, in its kind of view on drugs, and the legality behind it and all this kind of stuff, right? We're still kind of stuck in that era of, Nixon and Thatcher kind of, declaring that war on narcotics and stuff, and it's just, that's not helpful, right? So I think, an addict's never going to get clean, whether you, like, throw him in jail, like, time after time after time, um, because that's the, like, there are never big enough consequences to stop us using until we either die, or we are awoken in some way, shape, or form to want to do it ourselves. Like we have to find that switch has to be flipped, that kind of flame, that fire has to be ignited inside us. Otherwise, we're not going to do it anyway, right? It does not matter what you do, like how many family members have cut you off, how many consequences of, overdosing or, whatever it is, like nothing is ever going to stop an addict using until they want to. So the only thing we can do is to support people to use without criminalizing them, and to do it as safely as possible until that individual is ready to get clean. And then when they are, we open the doors to, like an institution, whether that's a 12-step rehab or just a medical detox center, whatever it is that individual needs. Yeah, when they're ready, we do that. But until then, we need to stop locking them up. We need to stop, um, giving them criminal records and, and all of this stuff. We just need to help them use safely, and to do it with compassion and stuff, like if you go to Canada now, they have shooting galleries where you can go and be around like really nice, pleasant staff that don't judge you, that help you use with clean works, and to use safely. They don't, you don't have to leave straight away. So you've got somewhere safe to be until you know that, you've not gone over again, and, and all of this kind of stuff. And, and we're just so far behind, and that's what we need in this country.
So, like, as you were just saying, like, at the moment, like, drug use is, like, heavily criminalized. Like, I saw this firsthand in prison for sure. Like masses of people who were there for basically trying to fund their own addictions through shoplifting and other means, as you've mentioned. Yeah, and it's really clear that people with easy access to money, right, like don't go to prison for using drugs. Like, and I know you were fortunate in some ways, like to have like a high-paying job, like during parts of your journey that could sustain you. Like, but yeah, I know like you still came into contact with the kind of like quote unquote criminal justice system. I just wondered, like, what are your opinions on drug use, like being criminalized? Like, do you think drugs should be legalized? I know you've mentioned that already, but like, yeah, kind of how would it make a difference?
I mean, emotionally and mentally, trauma wise, it would make a massive difference to be able to to use, because we don't have a choice, right? So to be able to use day in, day out without that constant fear of getting nicked again, like, like you said, like I was lucky enough to, because, in the fellowship we say, right, that it only ends three ways for us. It's jails, institutions, or death. And, luckily, like my contact with the criminal justice system was like severely less than most heroin and crack users, most junkies on the street, or most, whatever it is, like most raging alcoholics. I was very, very lucky. I ended up with a record, and I have seen inside of a prison and stuff, but I don't think, compared to what most people in the rooms, in the fellowships that I hear talk about their journeys, like I was so lucky. And, I only did rehab a couple of times as well, so which I probably wouldn't have got if I was, I wouldn't have got if I was locked up for years and years inside a jail. I wouldn't have got that really loving and caring kind of rehab treatment instead of, just being locked away in a cell for years just to, to get out and do it all over again. So, yeah, I think it needs to happen. We need drugs to be legalized, so you're not running around, scoring all day with constant fear of being nicked again, because that was, although it didn't happen often for me, that was kind of constantly on the back of my mind. And so yeah, for an addict's mental health, just not having that weighing on their shoulders all day, every day would be massive. If yeah, that would be one of the biggest differences. Obviously, like even when it comes down to medicinal kind of like structures of the drug, so molecularly, like if they were kind of made as kind of blanket substances across the board because they were legal, it would be really easy to do things like like to do a detox at home, like a community detox, rather than having to go into institutions and therefore taking up spaces and beds for people that might need it a little bit more than you do. Um, because you can't, detox yourself from street heroin, because each batch is different, like one could be laced with fentanyl and be 100 times stronger than the next. So you can't, you can't dose up yourself and wean yourself off of something that you've got no idea whether it's going to be so strong the next hit that it kills you, or you're going to need to do 10 times as much in the next needle because you're not going to feel it. So, that it'd be a lot safer. You're not going to have the constant fear of, is the next pin gonna, kill me? If it was, decriminalized, and there was kind of, that legal drugs that you could buy, so all this kind of stuff. I think, as far as trauma for my family as well, like, I know when got clean properly, my mum told me, more than once, that she used to go to bed every night, just like petrified that that was going to be the night where she got a call that, that I'd not made it through my last use up. And I think, I think if, or that was it, I'd done something like so horrific in my using that, this time I wasn't going to be, bailed out and, spend the rest of my life in jail or something. So, like, I think, making it legal would have, like, caused my family to have a lot less anxiety and trauma around all of this stuff as well.
Yeah, so I was active in a group like years ago resisting this mega prison up near Leicester, and like one of the members was like really passionate about an initiative called Support Don't Punish, which was kind of advocating that drug use should be treated as a health issue. Like, we had some events and stuff, and it's really interesting. And I just wondered, like, yeah, where you sit with that. Like, why do you think addiction is a health issue?
I mean, the simple answer to do I agree is yes, like 100%. I do not believe you can punish and rehabilitate someone at the same time. Like, it's just impossible.
So this podcast aims to like amplify many health projects and initiatives like around the world that kind of offer like grassroots alternatives, or like grassroots responses to the sort of inadequacies of state healthcare. For example, like, we recently interviewed the awesome East Tennessee Harm Reduction Project about their work. And yeah, I know you've been super active in recovery programs, and I've personally learned like so much from you around these, such as like Narcotics Anonymous. And I just wondered if you could share about your experiences in NA and like the fellowship in general.
A lot of people would have heard of Narcotics Anonymous, but I guess for those that haven't, it's a 12-step fellowship derived from Alcoholics Anonymous, with the same 12 steps, only you're focused on all kind of mind-altering substances. So it's worded slightly different, and we recover from the disease of addiction rather than just alcoholism like AA would. And yeah, it's 12 step, it's spiritual based, it's complete abstinence based program, much like the other 12 step fellowships. And for me, it was, although I went through rehab again when I eventually got clean, it was the fellowship itself that I think has saved my life and continues to, really. The rehab I went to, like I've already said, was a 12-step rehab anyway. So although I knew a fair bit about the fellowships before going to into treatment, and then continued to focus on that in treatment, it was only when I got out that I truly kind of wrapped myself around NA, and it's what worked for me. I kind of NA suggests to do something called 90 and 90, which is, for newcomers, when you first get clean, you try and do 90 meetings in 90 days. And for me, this last time round, it was literally a matter of life and death. And I was so scared to use again that I I think I did like 120 in 90, and kind of threw myself into the fellowship that intensely, and because of that, yeah, I kind of I got it this time, and yeah, I was doing meetings morning, noon, and night, and I think, you know, a lot of people um dip their toe in and kind of wonder why it, you know, it hasn't worked for them, and you know, and it's kind of one of the spiritual principles behind Narcotics Anonymous is, you know, to give back to the newcomer that what NA gave to you in the first place. And I think because of stuff like that, and because it's run by recovering addicts, you know, I think that's really what works, because it's not you know, you're not having health professionals or, you know, people claiming to understand what you're going through and have been through. So yeah, I think you know, NA as a fellowship is it's you know, the meetings are run by addicts, it's for addicts, and they are closed off to general public that don't believe they suffer with the disease of addiction. And with that kind of um you know, with that kind of underlying safety, and that principle of one addict helping another, I think that's truly the basis of why NA's been around for so long, and why it's for most people what has been the only thing to work to get them and keep them clean. Yeah, and not only that, you know, the actual program itself is kind of, when you start looking into it, it's self-explanatory as to what it is and how it works. And I do kind of, you know, I urge anyone that thinks they might be suffering with what I suffer with, to take a look at that. But it's deeper than that as well, you know. I mean, um, not only do you work the program and you identify with people at meetings and you have a safe place to share, but it also helps integrate you into society in loads of other ways, you know, like, you know, because it's run by addicts. When you join a group, you kind of, you can take on service positions. So, you know, you can make the teas and coffees, or you could be a treasurer, you could be a meter and greeter, and kind of welcome newcomers in. You know, there's loads of posts, and that itself kind of helps you, um you know, although I don't agree completely with like having to try and fit in with society, I try my best not to, but it kind of, it helps you with what a lot of people might want to do once they've got clean and are ready to move on with their life, you know, i.e. like get a job, or even just to help, you know, with the inevitable social interactions that come with getting clean, that actually a lot of us ran from, and found really difficult in the first place. So yeah, it's, you know, something that I would recommend wholly to anyone that, you know, is struggling out there.
Yeah, amazing. And I've like personally really loved learning like much more about the program. And yeah, like I didn't have any idea like how comprehensive all the step work was in terms of like really kind of hardcore personal development, and you know, the role of spirituality and stuff. Like I think it's, yeah, really inspiring to hear about. I know you've also volunteered like supporting other people struggling with active addiction in different kind of projects and things, and I just wondered if you can share a bit about these experiences, and you know, like what is your opinion of recovery services available to people? Like what is missing in this kind of like harm reduction world in the UK?
Yeah, so alongside you know, my own recovery and you know, taking what I can from the fellowship, I have volunteered a lot outside of that. I guess the main thing I did, and for quite a while actually, I guess it was for a couple of years, was I volunteered at the drug and alcohol service local to me, that helped me initially, and that funded me to, or partially funded me to go into rehab a couple of times. Um, so yeah, and it was an NHS funded drug service, with the idea of supporting people via group work, via via having your own personal recovery worker, getting people into treatment, or community detoxes if that's what they need. Um, yeah, and you know, helping people, you know, even to the point of harm reduction with clean works, you know, clean, um, needles and other, supplies that a lot of active users need to stay clean. And yeah, I volunteered. I started off with, just kind of meeting and greeting people, the new people walking in, that, rightly so might be petrified, and, just having a chat, making them a cup of tea, trying to make them feel welcome, because, like for most of us, asking for that help initially is possibly the scariest part of, the recovery journey. And yeah, and that progressed. I ended up taking on a small caseload, doing initial interventions with people, running the needle exchange. And yeah, and I did all of that for a couple of years, and it was really it was really fulfilling to help give back. But saying that, I think there is a massive issue in this country with how we go about helping people until they're ready to, engage in treatment or into the fellowship. Because ultimately you have to be ready. And in the short time that I worked there, and I was volunteering, the use of the needle exchange, was, the funding for that was cut, and it wasn't open 5-6 days a week like it was initially. So the days it opened was dropped, and so that harm prevention idea of keeping people safe whilst they use until they're ready was slowly dwindling away. And actually, it's something that I struggled with. It was I kind of moved on and helped people in other ways after that, because ultimately, it doesn't matter how much you push people to go into treatment, even offering, with the offer of funding, because if they're not ready and they don't want to engage in that, then it's just a waste of money. It's a waste of time. There could be other people that are ready, that could have used that space in that, had that bed in that treatment center that went to someone else. So the whole kind of premise of the drug service started to change a bit, and it was not something I really wanted to be involved in, anymore. And yeah, so I moved on to kind of help people in other ways. And that kind of looks like, volunteering at a night shelter, at one point, just keeping people safe overnight whilst they, managed to get off the streets, which was good. It was fulfilling again, but there was flaws in the, in the premise of it, because ultimately people weren't allowed to use, whilst they're in the shelter, which is fine, and I can understand why. But again, it would stop people coming. It was actually keeping people on the streets. These seasoned, street homeless people weren't taking the safety of a shelter because they needed to use, and again, because a lot of people look down on that kind of stuff, because we see it as, criminal behavior. People weren't taking the opportunity to stay safe. So again, after a while, and after seeing people being turned away and having to turn people away myself, it started kind of eating away at me, and I moved on again from that. So yeah, kind of since then, it's just been, I'll do what I can when I can, whether that looked like, before Christmas, walking around and handing out, socks and gloves to people that are street homeless, or, giving people food and stuff like this, or, even just stopping to talk to someone about whether they have heard of the fellowship and stuff like this. Maybe it's just, an opportunity to plant the seed that might eventually grow, into something later on. I just kind of do what I can when I can, sponsoring people through the fellowship and stuff like this. Because ultimately, people need to be ready. They need to be willing to accept the help. But yeah, I kind of do what I can when I can.
Yeah, and I think those kind of responses are really, really important. And like we talked about earlier with, like people being dehumanized, like I think those really simple acts can like literally support someone to feel like they're a human, right? And like they deserve to live and they deserve to not die from an overdose, for example. And like, as most people listening probably know, like, I kind of identify as an anarchist, and like that broadly, like, to me means being like committed to eradicating like all forms of domination. And like, I've been active in different movements for a really long time, like the last 20 years. And I feel like there's really like little kind of political organizing around addiction, like despite its kind of massive impact on society. And like, we support folks in prison, for example, who are there for like Kill the Bill and like fighting back against the police, or because they're part of a campaign. But like, the reality is, right, like most people in prison are there due to kind of poverty and active addiction. And I think I read some statistic that there's like like half of prisoners, for example, are addicted to drugs. But yeah, like, I guess for me, like, I know like a lot of people are kind of like following like advice on like what little they know about addiction, and like there's always this commentary about enabling people and that we have to like cut people out. And I feel like this means, like, in political movements, that we're also like abandoning people somehow. Like, some people are deserving of support and solidarity, and like others really aren't. Yeah, and sorry, that's like a total random political rant, but I guess, yeah, I had a couple of questions of like, yeah, what do you think of this whole like enabling people thing? And like, lots of people that have like family members, for example, in active addiction, like they do end up kind of having to cut ties with them, like in terms of preserving themselves somehow. And I think everyone I know that's had to do that has a lot of grief and like complicated feelings about it. I just wondered like what your like opinion is about that, and also like like, what solidarity do you think would be meaningful? Like, what do you wish people knew about addiction? And what sort of things do you think people were kind of doing in response?
I mean, as far as, enabling people, I think it's not really a thing. Like, if you are truly an addict and, you suffer with the same thing that I suffer with, you don't need enabling. You find means and ways to find and use drugs day in, day out, whether people are there or not, and ultimately, again, if you are lucky enough to have family that are trying to support you, which may look to people on the outside as enabling, then again, if you suffer with what I suffer with, that support, that kind of drive and want and push from your family or loved ones or friends to stop and get clean and, change your life, is never going to be enough. There will be, nothing other than that kind of spiritual change inside you, that want to get clean inside you, that will be the the right kind of drive to start your recovery journey. So yeah, I don't believe enabling's a thing. It's kind of like, it's like when people call drug dealers pushers, right? Like, they don't need to push the drugs. They don't need to wave it in front of us. We will seek it out. We will find ways and means to use more. So yeah, that's kind of, it doesn't make any sense to me as an addict. But and yeah, as far as cutting ties with people, I think most family and friends or partners of addicts, for their own mental health and for their own kind of safety and stuff, like, I completely understand when people just cut ties. I really get it. Like, it happened with me the last time. I phoned my mum from rehab after being there for a few weeks the last time I was in there, just to see how things were. And we basically had a conversation that ended with, like, we don't really want you back here. So, like, it was like, you do this and you do it on your own this time, and we'll be here waiting, hopefully, at the other end, if you're, still alive or you stay clean and stuff. So and that was purely to preserve themselves, because they had tried to help me in the past, and because I wasn't ready, because I didn't want to do it for me, it hadn't worked. And there's only so many times people can do that with someone, like before it actually starts to destroy them. And of course there's going to be grief on their part, but like I've already said, addiction's a family disease, and the family of the addict needs to start recovering too, and what that looks like is completely up to them. And yeah, and I think they deserve that after everything that us as addicts put them through. So I've got no qualms at all with people having to do that. And and I think we can promise that we will change and stuff like this, but until actions put into that, like I don't blame people for creating that space. In fact, I think sometimes it's necessary, but not for the reasons of like it to stop enabling the addict. Yeah, as I say, that's not really a thing with us. Yeah. As far as the solidarity, I think it needs to be spoken about more. And I would love to see people coming together. I know it's been mentioned in Parliament before by Russell Brand, like a well-known recovering addict, about trying to decriminalize us as addicts, and trying to focus on us being ill people rather than criminals, like I've said before. And it's been like years since he kind of started trying to push that, and it just seems like one no was enough to kind of make us crumble and stop coming together. And I think that's wrong. I think we do need to come together. We need to start talking about it more. We need to we need to campaign to get petitions. We need to campaign to get our voices heard, and that's the only way that people are going to start viewing this differently, and we need to we need to start educating people. Yeah. And I mean, on top of that, like, it just seems like we sweep this problem of active addiction, especially the like opioid crisis in this country, under the carpet, and just pretend like it's not happening. And if you take a look at America and stuff, they don't do it. They like the crisis is always it's front page stuff over there, to the point where there's like numerous grassroots projects of recovering addicts spending their time and their energy going around the streets, with naloxone pens, or they have like the inhalers and stuff, the nasal sprays now, so literally on a daily basis saving people's lives, or like street medics offering people dental work, kind of health checks, and going to them to give them that help, rather because a lot of us won't, especially street homeless people with no fixed abode over in this country, won't go and seek that help. They won't go and see a GP, or they won't go to a dentist. They'll leave abscesses until they become infected and get sepsis, and all of it, whatever it is, they won't go and seek that help. And we don't have that in this country. We don't have those soldiers on the streets, with putting the footwork in to help them and go to them, because we won't, addicts won't do it. And it could save lives. It really could. And I think that is something that needs to change in this country.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time and answering all the questions. Is there anything else you'd like to share in terms of addiction or trauma or recovery, or anything you think people listening should hear?
Just reach out, just ask for help. It is out there. Yeah, I mean, you're always going to have to be the one to put the hard work in. You're going to have to be the one that puts the action in, but there are places you can go to get wrapped around other people, to get the love and support that you need whilst you do that. So yeah, please, 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 just kind of, yeah, ask for help. Go to a fellowship, whether it's AA, NA, like there's CA, cocaine and all this. There's an anonymous fellowship for everything. And, you know, whether it's substances, alcohol, any other obsessive and compulsive behavior that has got you into trouble and is affecting your life negatively, there is a fellowship out there for it. And, you know, if someone like myself can get clean and stay clean, then, you know, there is hope for you out there. I promise you that.
Thanks so much for listening to the Frontline Herbalism podcast. You can find the transcript, the links, all the resources from the show at solidarityapothecary.org/podcast.